told you that the greatest empire in history, proud of its legions, was actually afraid of water. The Romans could build roads through mountains and defeat armies with numbers and discipline. But the sea filled them with genuine terror. For a people of farmers and soldiers, the ocean was chaos, obeying no laws of logic or tactics. When Carthage appeared on the horizon, a maritime power whose ships ruled the waves of the Mediterranean, Rome faced a threat for which it was completely unprepared. They had no fleet, no experience of naval warfare, not even the terms to describe the maneuvers of ships. And yet they understood that if they did not go to sea, Rome itself would soon cease to exist. Then the Republic did the impossible. In a matter of years, the Romans built hundreds of ships, learned seamanship from scratch, and invented a weapon that no one else had: the Corvus boarding bridge, which turned every naval encounter into a familiar land battle. They did not learn to swim. They made sure that the enemy could no longer sail away. Watch the video to the end to learn how a nation without a single admiral created a fleet that conquered the Mediterranean. Why naval warfare changed the very essence of Rome, and how a fear of water gave birth to a new empire. I will reveal a secret that is usually overlooked. In its early days, Rome was ridiculously weak at sea. The entire early history of the Republic was linked to conquests on the Italian peninsula, where heavy infantry played a decisive role. The sea was something that washed their borders, not a battlefield. They entrusted all maritime transport and coastal defense to their allies, mainly Greek colonial cities in southern Italy. The Senate had no idea how to build and use large military fleets. This weakness was not a problem until Rome faced an enemy whose power was based entirely on its navy. The First Punic War began because of a conflict in Sicily, and the Romans quickly learned the harsh truth. Their legions could capture any city on the coast, but the Carthaginians simply boarded their ships and sailed away. They controlled all sea routes, landed troops behind Roman lines, and plundered the Italian coast with impunity. The Roman consuls, accustomed to decisive land battles, were in despair. They stood on the shore and watched helplessly as enemy squadrons controlled the straits. The first attempts to transport troops to Sicily on improvised transport ships were a disaster. The fast and maneuverable Carthaginian ships easily intercepted and sank the clumsy Roman transports. It was a national humiliation that the Senate could not tolerate. The realization that the war could not be won on land alone came quickly and painfully. Carthage was a trading empire, its wealth and military power coming from across the sea. To defeat the enemy, it was necessary to deprive them of this advantage. Rome had to become a maritime power, or it risked losing the war and remaining a secondary force in the region forever. This decision was one of the most daring and unprecedented in ancient history. Rome did not have experienced shipbuilders capable of creating modern warships. They did not have admirals who knew the intricacies of naval tactics. They did not have thousands of trained rowers who formed the backbone of any fleet. They started from absolute zero, challenging an enemy that had dominated the seas for centuries. This complete incompetence in maritime affairs forced the Romans to look for unconventional solutions. They understood that they would not be able to surpass the Carthaginians at their own game. Maneuverable combat using rams. To win, the Romans had to come up with something completely new. They had to change the rules of naval warfare themselves, adapting them to their strengths. It was this vulnerability, this desperate situation, that became the catalyst for the greatest naval revolution in history. The Romans did not try to become better sailors than the Carthaginians. They decided to make sailing skills irrelevant. They were going to turn the sea into a land battlefield where their legionnaires could do what they did best. This entire Titanic project, this entire industrial and military revolution, did not begin with a stroke of genius. It began with luck, with a single incident on a deserted beach that gave the Romans what they lacked. This incident gave them a foothold from which they could turn the world upside down. The foundation had been laid, but the scale of the task was enormous. It was not enough to simply build ships. An entire industry had to be created from scratch. Shipyards, materials, workers, and most importantly, thousands of people willing to become sailors were needed. Rome faced a logistical challenge that seemed impossible for a landlocked nation. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think is more important for victory? Centuries of experience or bold innovation born from scratch in response to a crisis? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next episodes about the great projects of ancient Rome. Are you ready to learn the truth about the invincible enemy Rome faced? To understand the scale of Rome's feat, you first need to understand what the Carthaginian fleet was all about. It wasn't just a group of ships. It was the result of centuries of continuous maritime evolution. Carthage was founded by the Phoenicians, the greatest seafarers of antiquity. They inherited and perfected all their knowledge of shipbuilding and navigation. The Carthaginian Empire was a thalassocracy, a power whose authority was based on its dominance of the seas. Their entire economy, based on trade in metals from Spain and goods from all over the Mediterranean, depended on their fleet. Their military strategy was built around the mobility that ships provided. They were able to transport armies, supply their colonies, and blockade their enemies solely thanks to their fleet. At the heart of this power was the quinquereme, or pentary. It was the most modern and powerful warship of its time. Its name meant five, referring to its rowing system. Historians still argue about the exact configuration, but it is most likely that there were 5 rowers on each oar, or that the oars were arranged in groups of 5. It was a complex machine to control, but incredibly powerful, requiring the coordinated work of hundreds of trained rowers. There were about 300 rowers and more than 100 Marines on board the quinquereme. The ship was fast, maneuverable, and armed with a powerful bronze ram. Carthaginian sailors were professionals of the highest order. They were born on the coast, spent their entire lives at sea, and had an intuitive understanding of winds, currents, and tactics. Their skills were honed in countless skirmishes and trading expeditions. Carthaginian tactics were the pinnacle of naval artistry at the time. They used complex maneuvers such as the Dioclepus and Pericleus. The first involved a rapid breakthrough through enemy lines with the aim of breaking the oars of their ships. The second involved flanking the enemy to deliver a ramming blow to their vulnerable side. These maneuvers required incredible speed, coordination, and experience, which the Romans did not have. Their naval bases, especially Carthage itself, were marvels of engineering. They had huge enclosed harbors, dry docks, and arsenals. Their shipyards could build and repair ships at incredible speed. They had centuries of experience in finding and processing ship timber and producing sails and ropes. It was a well-oiled industrial machine designed to dominate the seas. The fleet was led by experienced admirals from aristocratic families such as the Barkids. These men had devoted their entire lives to the study of naval warfare. They looked down on the Romans as uncouth farmers who looked ridiculous on the deck of a ship. And at first they were absolutely right, which made the Carthaginians' self-confidence their main weakness. The Mediterranean Sea was their inland lake. Anyone who wanted to trade or wage war had to reckon with their fleet. To challenge them was tantamount to declaring war on the elements themselves. The Romans, who did not have a single comparable ship, seemed doomed to defeat. This technological and cultural gap seemed insurmountable. The Romans could not simply copy their enemies' tactics, as they did not have time to train thousands of sailors to the required level. They needed an asymmetrical response. They needed to find a way to neutralize all of Carthage's advantages in one fell swoop. How could a land power challenge such might without ships or experience? But what if I told you that the entire Roman naval program began with a single shipwreck? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secret of the stolen blueprint that changed everything. Guess what happened next? The entire Roman fleet, all of its future naval power, began with one lucky accident on an Italian beach. The legend described by the historian Polybius says that at the very beginning of the war, a Carthaginian quinquereme, pursuing Roman ships, came too close to the shore. The ship ran aground and was captured by the Romans almost intact. This moment became a turning point in the war and in history. For the Romans, it was not just military booty. It was a textbook, technology, and blueprint all rolled into one. They immediately towed the captured ship to their makeshift shipyards. The best Roman engineers, who had previously only built bridges, aqueducts, and siege engines, surrounded the sea monster. They had never seen anything like it up close, and their pragmatic minds immediately set to work. The ship was carefully studied and literally taken apart piece by piece. The Romans did not just look at it. They measured every curve of the hull, every beam, and every joint. They analyzed how the keel was constructed, how the stiffeners were attached, and how the complex system of rowing benches was organized. They absorbed centuries of Carthaginian experience in a matter of weeks. But here's what makes this story truly unique. The Romans did not blindly copy. They were engineers, not mere imitators. They understood that the Carthaginian ship was designed for speed and maneuverability. It was relatively light and flexible. The Romans did not need speed, they needed a platform for their main weapon. Therefore, taking the Carthaginian design as a basis, they made key changes to it. Roman ships became heavier, stronger, and slightly wider. They sacrificed maneuverability for stability. Their ship had to withstand not only a ram strike, but also the weight of dozens of fully armed legionnaires, as well as the weight of the secret weapon they were already developing. This reverse engineering process was carried out with incredible speed and efficiency. While engineers were drawing up plans and creating templates, orders to begin construction had already been given throughout Italy. The captured ship became a reference model from which hundreds of copies were made. It was the first mass production in history based on a captured model. Roman pragmatism was on full display here. They had no ego or pride that prevented them from learning from their enemy. They saw the best solution in the world, took it, and adapted it to their needs. They did not try to invent the quinquereme from scratch. They simply took a ready-made one and improved it for their specific tasks. This episode demonstrates a fundamental difference in thinking. Carthage rested on the laurels of its traditions, considering them unshakable. Rome saw tradition as nothing more than a set of tools that could be used or discarded. Capturing this ship gave them not just technology, it gave them the confidence that they could do it. If you like this story about the pragmatic genius of the Romans that allowed them to crack the code of enemy technology, give this video a thumbs up. That was only the first step. Now with the blueprint in hand, they needed to build a fleet, and do so on a scale the world had never seen before. Now they had the design, but they needed ships, and they needed them yesterday. Hundreds of ships. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new videos about the amazing engineering solutions and grandiose construction projects of ancient Rome. Guess how long it took the Roman Senate to build a fleet of 120 ships from scratch? The answer will shock you. According to ancient historians, it took only 60 days. From the moment the first tree was cut down to the launch of the finished ships, 2 months passed. This figure seems fantastic, but it reflects the essence of Roman organizational power. The Senate passed a decree to build 100 quinkers and 20 triremes. It was an order that was not open to discussion. The entire Republic was mobilized to accomplish this task. The first and foremost resource was wood. Huge areas of forest in the Apennines and on the coast were immediately cut down. Pine, fir, and oak were needed in enormous quantities. Tens of thousands of people were herded into this work. They were not slaves, but allies of Rome, citizens and freedmen. Legions temporarily removed from combat duty were turned into brigades of lumberjacks and builders. Everyone understood that the outcome of the war depended on the speed of their work. This was not just a construction project, it was a military operation. The logistics were nightmarish. The felled logs had to be delivered to coastal shipyards. All available means were used for this purpose. Trees were floated down rivers, dragged along specially laid tracks, and transported on massive carts. The entire transport system of Italy was put at the service of the fleet. But the real key to this incredible speed was standardization. The Romans, based on the captured Carthaginian model, did not build each ship individually. They created templates for each detail, for the keel, for the frames, for the planking. They essentially invented assembly line production 2,000 years before Henry Ford. The parts were cut on sawmills and delivered to the shipyard ready-made. The construction crews only had to assemble them in the correct order, like a giant construction set. This allowed dozens of ships to be built simultaneously. Every shipyard, whether in Ostia or Naples, worked according to a single blueprint and a single standard. Other industries worked in parallel. Thousands of weavers throughout Italy produced kilometers of sailcloth. Rope makers wove tons of hemp rope for rigging. Blacksmiths forged millions of nails, staples, and other metal fittings. It was a total mobilization of the entire economy of the Republic. This industrial leap would have been impossible without the organizational genius of the Romans, their ability to manage huge masses of people, coordinate complex logistics chains, and ensure uninterrupted supplies had been honed during land wars. Now they simply applied army management principles to industrial production. Of course, the quality of these first ships, built in such a hurry, was probably not very high. They were heavy, clumsy, and possibly leaky, but that didn't matter. Their job was not to serve for decades. Their job was to withstand one battle and deliver the legionaries to the enemy's deck. This feat demonstrated to Carthage something more frightening than a new fleet. It demonstrated Rome's inexhaustible resources and unyielding will. But how was this giant machine supplied? In the next chapter, we will take a look behind the scenes and see how the shipyards that provided this endless stream of ships worked. Roman shipyards, especially the main harbor at Ostia, suddenly became the largest industrial areas in the ancient world. These were not just places for building ships. They were complex logistics centers that operated around the clock. Keeping them running required flawless organization. The entire supply system was built on predictability and efficiency. As we have already mentioned, the main material was wood, but different types of wood were needed to build a single ship. The strongest oak was used for the keel, the foundation of strength. More flexible species were used for the frames. The planking was made of pine or spruce, as these trees provided long, straight boards. All of this had to be delivered, sorted, and properly dried, which was a separate problem in a hurry. Then came the caulking process. To make the hull watertight, the gaps between the planks had to be carefully coated and caulked. This required two key resources: resin and hemp. The resin was obtained by slowly burning pine stumps. Hemp for making tow and ropes was grown in the fields. Demand for these materials skyrocketed, and mass harvesting was organized throughout Italy. Metal was another vital component. Each ship required thousands of bronze or iron nails to fasten the planking. Bronze was preferred for the underwater parts, as it did not rust in salt water, but it was also more expensive. In addition to nails, staples, anchor chains, and of course, bronze for casting massive rams were needed. Metallurgical workshops worked non-stop. Sails were the ship's engine when oars were not in use. Hundreds of square meters of durable fabric were required to make one large square sail for a quinquereme. Usually this was linen or coarse hemp fabric. This material had to be woven, sewn, and reinforced. Entire villages were mobilized solely for the production of sailcloth. Ropes, or rigging, were the nervous system of the ship. They were needed to control the sails, raise the anchors, and secure the masts. Rope workshops, where long strands of hemp were twisted into strong ropes, worked continuously. The quality of these ropes was critically important, as a broken rope in battle or in a storm could lead to the loss of the ship. The supply of the workers themselves should not be forgotten. Tens of thousands of people worked in the shipyards. All of them had to be fed. This required a separate logistical operation to deliver grain, oil, and wine. Any disruption in food supplies could halt construction. Thus, the Navy depended on logistics just as much as the Army. The shipyards at Ostia were expanded. New warehouses, workshops, and barracks for workers were built. The harbor was deepened to accommodate ships with greater draft. The Romans applied their skills in construction and hydraulic engineering to create an infrastructure capable of supporting their new ambitions. Once built, the fleet needed constant maintenance. Ships of that era required regular care. They had to be pulled ashore to clean the hulls of barnacles and algae that slowed them down. The hull had to be regularly inspected for leaks and retard. This meant that shipyards had to work not only on construction, but also on constant repairs. This entire gigantic system was managed by quaestors and special officials appointed by the Senate. They monitored expenses, distributed contracts, and ensured that materials were delivered on time. This bureaucratic machine, although cumbersome, provided an unprecedented level of organization. Rome was not just building a fleet, it was building a military-industrial complex. What if I told you that the Roman Navy's main weapon was stolen from the Greeks but perfected to such an extent that it became a completely new type of weapon? The ram, or rostrum in Latin, was not a Roman invention. The Greeks had used it masterfully in battles such as Salamis hundreds of years earlier. It was a pointed protrusion on the bow of a ship at the waterline, designed to pierce enemy hulls. Greek and Carthaginian tactics for using the ram were based on speed and maneuverability. Their lighter ships were designed for quick attacks. They sought to deliver a glancing blow to break the enemy's oars, depriving them of their momentum. After that, they could turn around and deliver a decisive blow with the ram to the unprotected side or stern. It was an art that required tremendous experience. The Romans, as we know, took a different approach. Their ships, built hastily and from heavier wood, were slower and much less maneuverable. They could not compete with the Carthaginians in speed. Therefore, they changed both the design and tactics of using the ram. They turned it from a rapier into a sledgehammer. The Roman rostrum was not just a pointed nose. It was a massive, solid bronze structure, often weighing several hundred kilograms. It had a complex shape, often with 3 horizontal blades, designed not just to punch a hole, but to inflict maximum structural damage. It was designed to tear the plating and break the frames. Most importantly, this bronze tip was not simply attached to the bow. It was deeply integrated into the entire structure of the ship's bow. A powerful keel and several rows of longitudinal beams converged at this point. In essence, the entire ship, weighing dozens of tons, was transformed into one giant spear. The Roman ship was designed to withstand a head-on collision at full speed. This design dictated their tactics. The Romans did not try to outmaneuver the enemy or break their oars. They went for a direct ram. Their goal was either to cause such damage that the enemy ship would quickly take on water, or, even better, to literally get stuck in the enemy's side. This deprived the enemy of maneuverability and paved the way for the next step. To withstand such enormous loads during a collision, the entire structure of the Roman ship was reinforced. They used more cross beams and thicker planking. This made their ships heavier and slower, but it was an advantage for their tactics. The ship had greater inertia, and the impact was devastating. This evolution of the ram shows the Roman approach. Take an existing idea and take it to its logical maximum in accordance with their strengths. They could not win by maneuvering, so they relied on brute force and structural strength. The ram was the first step in their plan to change the rules. But even such a powerful battering ram had a drawback. It required getting close to the enemy, who was still faster and could dodge a head-on attack. The Romans needed something else. They needed a way to force the fast Carthaginian ship to stand still and accept battle on their terms. But how could they force a fast Carthaginian ship to stay put and wait to be boarded? To solve this problem, the Romans invented a device so ingenious and simple that it changed the rules of naval combat forever. In the next chapter, we will talk about the crow. The genius of the Romans lay not in becoming the best sailors, but in making the art of sailing unnecessary. The central element of this new philosophy was the Corvus, or raven. It was a boarding device that was as simple as it was deadly. It was a direct solution to the main Roman problem: how to make legionnaires fight on water as well as on land. The Corvus was a heavy wooden boarding bridge, or ramp. Its standard length was about 11 meters, and its width was just over a meter. It was wide enough for 2 fully armed legionnaires to run side by side. The bridge was equipped with high railings on both sides to protect soldiers from projectiles during an attack. The structure was installed at the bow of the Roman ship. It did not simply lie on the deck. It was attached to a special mast or a pole about 7 meters high. The bridge could rotate freely around this pole, allowing it to be aimed not only directly ahead, but also at ships sailing parallel to the ship. This provided tactical flexibility in the chaos of close combat. At the far end of the bridge, on the underside, was its main component, a massive pointed iron or bronze spike. It was curved like a crow's beak, hence the name of the device. This spike was designed so that when the bridge fell, it would pierce the deck planks of the enemy ship with tremendous force, locking the 2 ships together. The Corvus was controlled by a system of ropes and blocks attached to the mast. In the marching position, the bridge was raised vertically. In battle, when the Roman ship approached the enemy at a sufficient distance, the ropes were released. The bridge fell onto the enemy's deck under its own weight and the weight of the beak. The impact was so strong that the spike dug deep into the wood. As soon as the beak dug into the deck, the battle was essentially decided. The two ships became firmly locked together. The Carthaginian captain could no longer use his speed or maneuverability. He could not escape, nor could he turn around for a ramming attack. He was trapped, chained to the Roman ship. At that very moment, the second act began. A stream of Roman legionaries rushed across this improvised bridge onto the enemy's deck. These were not sailors. They were battle-hardened infantrymen with their large shields, short swords, and javelins. They were machines for close combat, and now they were fighting on solid ground. The Carthaginian crews could do nothing to counter this. Their marines were more lightly armed and were not trained to fight in close formation against heavy infantry. Their rowers, who made up the majority of the crew, were completely unarmed and untrained in combat. The battle on deck usually ended in a matter of minutes. The Corvus completely changed the tactics of naval warfare. It nullified all of Carthage's advantages in speed and experience. It turned a naval battle from a maneuverable duel into a brutal land battle. The Romans did not play by Carthage's rules. They simply threw the rulebook overboard. Of course, the Raven had serious drawbacks. It was incredibly heavy and cumbersome. Located at the bow, it seriously compromised the ship's stability, making it top-heavy. In heavy storms, ships equipped with the Raven were much more prone to capsizing, resulting in the loss of thousands of lives in sea storms. Nevertheless, as a tactical tool for decisive battles, it was invaluable. It gave Rome what it needed most, a chance to use its main strength, its legions. It was a weapon that allowed a land power to win at sea without becoming a maritime power in the full sense of the word. So the ships were built using stolen blueprints. The shipyards were working at full capacity, producing logs, ropes, and sails. Engineers created a battering ram and an ingenious boarding bridge. But one very difficult problem remained. Who would row the ships? The new fleet of 120 ships required at least 30,000 rowers. Rome did not have that many trained sailors. They had to be found and trained from scratch. And in the same 60 days that the ships were being built, the Carthaginians spent years training their rowers, bringing their coordination to the point of automatism. The Romans did not have that kind of time. Once again, they applied their unique approach based on discipline and simulation. The rowers were mainly the poorest Roman citizens and residents of allied Italian cities. It was hard and dangerous work, but it paid well. Contrary to popular belief, the rowers in Republican Rome at that time were not slaves. They were free men mobilized for military service, just like legionaries. But how could 30,000 farmers and shepherds, many of whom had never seen the sea in their lives, be taught the art of rowing a quinquereme? Roman engineers came up with an ingenious solution. If there were no ships for training, simulators would have to be built. Huge wooden platforms were erected on the coast, right on the sand. These platforms accurately imitated the rowing benches and deck of a quinquereme. Thousands of recruits were seated on these land ships in the same order in which they would sit on the water. They held real oars in their hands, which may have simply been resting on supports. It was a gigantic staging that covered entire fields. In the center of each such squadron stood an instructor, or gortator, on a platform. He beat out the rhythm with a drum or hammer. His task was to teach thousands of people one thing: to row in sync. They started at a slow pace, practicing the simple movement over and over again: catch, drive, recovery. They practiced not only the rowing itself, but also the commands. Start rowing. Tabani, row backwards to slow down. Speed up. All these maneuvers were vital in battle. Legionary discipline was transferred to the rowing benches. People who were used to obeying orders on the battlefield were forced to obey the rhythm of the drum just as unquestioningly. For hours, days, and weeks, these landlubbers rowed in place under the scorching sun. It was grueling training, but it paid off. They did not become skilled sailors. They did not learn to feel the wind or read the waves, but they learned the most important thing: to be a single mechanism capable of accelerating the ship on command. When the first ships were launched 60 days later, these crews trained on land took their places on the benches. Their first voyages must have been terrible. The ships were clumsy, the rowers were rough, but they could move the ship forward, and that was enough. This episode with the land-based training equipment perfectly illustrates the Roman spirit. Faced with an impossible task, they did not retreat. They deconstructed the problem and found a simple, albeit laborious, engineering and organizational solution. They could not give their people experience, so they gave them muscle memory and discipline. The new Roman naval machine was ready to be tested, the fleet was built, the crews were trained on land, and the formidable crows adorned the bows of the ships. The Carthaginians, aware of the construction of the Roman fleet, were not particularly concerned. They were confident that experience and maneuverability would always defeat brute force and amateurs. The first real test took place in 260 BC at Cape Milo, near the coast of Sicily. The Roman fleet was commanded by Consul Gaius Duilius. The Carthaginian squadron, consisting of 130 ships, was commanded by the experienced admiral Hannibal Hiscon. He was so confident of victory that he did not even bother with the correct battle formation, his ships sailing in disarray. When the Carthaginians approached the Roman fleet, they saw strange and cumbersome structures on the bows of the enemy ships. They did not attach any importance to them, mistaking them for some kind of clumsy attempt at a boarding ladder. They began the battle using their favorite tactics, rapid breakthroughs and ramming the sides of the ships. The first Carthaginian ships rushed towards the Roman vanguard. The Romans did not try to maneuver. Their task was simply to move forward or expose their sides so that the enemy was within reach. As soon as a Carthaginian ship came close enough for a ramming attack, the Raven crashed onto its deck with a bang. The heavy spike pierced the planks and the two ships were locked together. It was a shock for the Carthaginians. Their fast, maneuverable ship suddenly turned into a stationary target, chained to the enemy platform. At that very moment, Roman legionnaires stormed across the bridge. The battle, which was supposed to be a naval duel, turned into a massacre on the deck. The heavily armored legionnaires easily overpowered the lightly armed sailors. One after another, Carthaginian ships fell into this trap. Hannibal Hiscon, watching his best ships being captured one after another, fled in panic. The Romans captured 31 ships, including the admiral's flagship, and sank another 14. It was not just a victory, it was a sensation. A land power had defeated the ruler of the seas in its own element. The victory at Mylae had a tremendous psychological effect. The Romans realized that their invention worked. The Carthaginians realized that their centuries-long supremacy was over. The Corvus became the decisive factor that completely changed the balance of power in the war. The Senate was delighted and Gaius Duilius received a triumph in Rome, the first triumph in history for a naval victory. The culmination of this tactic was the Battle of Cape Ecnomus in 256 BC. It was one of the largest, if not the largest, naval battles in ancient history. Nearly 700 ships and hundreds of thousands of men from both sides took part in it. The Romans again used the crows to neutralize the maneuverability of the Carthaginians and turn the battle into a series of boarding skirmishes. This victory allowed the Romans to land unopposed in Africa, bringing the war to enemy territory. The invention of the Corvus, born out of desperation and lack of experience, proved to be the key to victory in the First Punic War. It allowed Rome to gain the time necessary for its own sailors to gain experience. Over time, as Roman rowers and admirals became as skilled as their opponents, the need for the crow disappeared. The device was too dangerous in bad weather. The Romans abandoned it, but it had fulfilled its historical mission. It was the crutch that allowed Rome to learn to walk on water. This story shows that sometimes in war, it is not those who follow the rules who win, but those who rewrite them. The Romans could not win by Carthaginian rules, so they imposed their own. And this audacity, backed by engineering ingenuity and industrial power, laid the foundation for their future dominance. The victory in the First Punic War, achieved in large part thanks to a surprisingly rapid naval revolution, forever changed the face of Rome and its entire future history. The Republic, which at the beginning of the conflict was almost entirely a land power, accustomed to relying on its legions and maintaining power only on the Italian peninsula, ended the war in a completely new state. The Roman political and military system was transformed by this difficult and protracted confrontation. For the first time, it became the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean, confidently controlling key sea routes. It now had a navy that had not existed before, experience in long-distance naval operations, and its first overseas territories, such as Sicily, which became an integral part of the Roman world and subsequently an important source of grain. In fact, it was after the end of the war that Rome became a power capable of operating not only on land, but also at sea, which opened up completely new horizons for it. The legacy of these inventions proved to be enormous and gave impetus to many of Rome's future achievements. A boarding device known as a crow played a huge role in turning the tide of the war. Over time, it was removed from service as it became clear that its use was limited and not always effective in rough seas. However, another innovation, the famous ram or rostrum, became a permanent fixture. It became a symbol of Roman naval power and a testament to how Rome used every idea available to achieve victory. Captured enemy ships with their refined rostra were brought to the capital as proof of Roman superiority. These trophies adorned the orator's tribune in the Forum, giving it the very shape and name that eventually became a historical symbol. The rostra reminded the people of Rome that naval victories were now part of their political reality and that Roman influence extended far beyond the peninsula. But the main legacy was not a single technology, but a huge infrastructure complex and accumulated experience, without which the subsequent centuries of Roman rule would have been impossible. Rome realized that control of the sea was crucial to its status as a great power. The fleet ceased to be a temporary measure created for a single war. It became part of state policy, an instrument that was to constantly defend the interests of the Republic. The shipyards built in haste received new improvements. Over time, they turned into big shipbuilding centers that kept the Roman fleet going. This was a long-term investment in Rome's future because now every new conflict could rely not only on legions, but also on naval power. Maintaining the fleet required new taxes, the organization of supplies, training of crews, and constant improvement of the management structure, which in turn strengthened the state system. After the final defeat of Carthage, Rome found itself in a unique position. It no longer had any serious naval rivals capable of posing a real threat. This meant that the nature of the fleet's work began to change. Now, it was needed not so much for grand battles as for maintaining order. The Mediterranean Sea, which was under the complete control of Rome, became a huge space that required constant monitoring. The fleet turned into a kind of police force. One of its main tasks was to fight piracy. Pirates in the eastern Mediterranean threatened trade, kidnapped people, and hindered the normal economic development of the regions. Rome understood that constant patrols of the sea were a necessary condition for maintaining peace and stability. The pirates, despite their numerous hideouts, could not withstand the power of the Roman fleet, which gradually cleared the coasts and ports of them. A special place in the history of the fleet is occupied by Gnaeus Pompeius' famous campaign against the Cilician pirates. This campaign was a true masterpiece of logistics and organizational art. It would have been impossible without a huge, pre-prepared fleet. Pompey divided the sea into sectors and directed his squadrons so that the pirates had nowhere to hide. In a surprisingly short time, he cleared the entire sea of pirate bases, ensuring the safety of trade routes for decades. This action was of great importance not only for security, but also for the economy of Rome, because now trade could develop freely. Pompey proved that Rome was ready to use its full potential to protect its interests. However, perhaps the most important function of the fleet was logistics, which ensured the viability of the entire empire. Rome was a huge city with a constantly growing population and increasing food needs. The empire, especially the capital, was critically dependent on regular grain supplies. Most of this grain came from Egypt and North Africa, where the climate allowed for huge harvests. The system of supplying the population, known as cura annii, was only possible thanks to the fleet. Huge transport ships, protected by warships, delivered grain to Italy. The Navy not only escorted these ships, but also coordinated their routes, making supplies reliable and stable. In case of threat, the Navy could quickly mobilize, ensuring the safety of the food supply on which the lives of millions of people depended. The fleet became a vital bridge for the legions, allowing armies to be transported to any point in the growing empire with unprecedented speed. Instead of long land journeys that could take months, the legions could now travel by sea, which greatly accelerated their movement. The wars in Spain, Caesar's long campaigns in Gaul, the expeditions to Britain, and the Eastern expeditions were made possible in large part by the fleet. It provided not only transportation, but also supplies and, when necessary, evacuation of troops. We conclude our dive into the history of how Rome, a land power, created one of the greatest fleets in history overnight. From the stolen blueprint of a Carthaginian ship to the industrial wonders of the shipyards, from the reimagined ram to the ingenious crow, each step was dictated by necessity and implemented with pure Roman pragmatism. These inventions and organizational decisions allowed them not only to defeat Carthage, but also to lay the foundation for their centuries-long domination of the Mediterranean Sea. The history of the Roman fleet proves that technological and tactical superiority can be created from scratch if there is the will, resources, and willingness to think outside the box. What other topics from the history of ancient Rome or other great civilizations would you like to see on our channel? Perhaps you are interested in the logistics of the Roman legions or the construction of great aqueducts. Write your ideas in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next explorations of the great events of the past.